in fact, I do agree with you, because initial projections at some point had made the point that there could be millions of deaths. At the moment, India is at 64,000. Our fertility rate is still lower than most other countries with a similar number of cases. So that's some point of a silver lining. Of course, it's not a lining for those people who've actually had loved ones die. But just to ask, then we've come to a situation where I think economically we just can't afford to lock down anymore. So we're seeing unlock 4, we're seeing India opening up, but then that is coinciding with an unprecedented rise in cases as well. So are we now perhaps going the other end of the spectrum, that we were too tough in the beginning and now being opening up too rapidly at a time when cases are rising?
Sonia, again, focusing on the economic, aspects, what is, and this is being seen in if you look at the e-way bills data, despite there being local lockdowns, and as you would appreciate, local lockdowns affect the interstate trade. So e-way bills are showing up at almost the same level as last year. And that is despite some of these local lockdowns that are happening because of the pandemic. But the unlock phase has clearly shown the data, and we in the ministry here track about 60 indicators, high frequency indicators on a fortnightly basis. And based on those indicators, it clearly seems to suggest that the unlock phase has enabled the recovery. Yes, some of the local lockdowns will be required, given the given the cases in particular geographical areas. Those will have some local impacts which may affect interstate trade, but overall at the macroeconomic level, it seems like the unlock has helped in the recovery.
Do you feel that now, and an SPI report is out which predicts the GDP could be, the contraction for the year ahead could be about 10%. Do you see that India now officially being in a recession? Do you think that India has gone into a recession at this point? What's your forecast?
What is important, Sonia, at this point is to focus on the fact that clearly, there is a recovery that is going on. In a period of extreme uncertainty like the one that, we are witnessing, it's very hard to put down numbers. In times like, of uncertain times, as Deng Xiaoping used to say, you actually cross the river by feeling the stones. And so you have to actually, take it step by step. It's very difficult at this point in time to predict what the full year number would be. But going forward, there is no doubt that the numbers will be better.
So, well, glad to hear you're optimistic on that. Of course, at the moment also, there's a big debate on GST and whether the government has the money to actually fulfill some of its obligations, whether there should be more borrowing. The RBI's economic report is also out. There's been some controversy of the words used, act of God. Some saying act of, the finance minister said that this is an act of God what's happened, so we can't actually pay out the GST. The opposition saying it's more about praying to God. And again, many people have written into us after we put out that you were actually coming on the show. And one Twitter user has written in saying that the Indian GDP before March 2020 has actually fallen from Q2 2018, when it was about 7.1%, to Q4 2019-20 to 3.1%. So don't blame God for what the government's inaction is.
So from an economic perspective, Sonia, this is a time where, as economists would recommend, it's overall spending that is important. I wouldn't get into the distinction between whether it should be center versus state spending. What is really critical at this point in time, given that consumption accounts for about 60% of GDP, and that is in the private sector. Similarly, investment accounts for 25% of GDP. And the impact of the pandemic on consumption and investment has to basically be filled up by the government spending. So that is something which is important to keep in mind. Another key aspect in the Indian context, many of us forget, but during the Asian financial crisis, for 3 years, the Indian economy had recorded GDP growth rates of 3.8% in 2000, 4.8% in 2001, and 3.8% in 2002. It was the fiscal spend at that time, especially the infrastructure that was built, the Golden Quadrilateral, which of course increased the debt to GDP ratio to its peak, close to 85, 86%. but brought growth back. And the growth that we had starting from 2003 onwards, on average 8% till the global financial crisis, came from the fiscal spend. So it's not, India has been there in this period. There are very good positive lessons to learn from that Asian financial crisis experience and avoid what happened during the global financial crisis, when again the fiscal spend was done, but the quality of expenditure was poor. As a result, we basically had the taper tantrum in 2013. So to avoid what we actually did, following the global financial crisis, but to implement what we did during the Asian financial crisis.